Of the Red Army's Air Force is no longer a match for the Luftwaffe's latest models. A month after Barbarossa, Andrei Tupolev and the other Soviet aircraft designers are suddenly freed. In the next few years, they will invent a host of cutting-edge designs that eventually make Russia second only to America as the world's leading aviation power. In the summer of 1941, the Nazi Luftwaffe owns the skies above Soviet Russia. The Russians must buy time to evacuate the Soviet war machine to safety deep in the Ural Mountains. The Soviets need a fast, simple fighter plane that can be built easily in huge numbers. In July 1941, barely a month after the Nazi invasion, the Soviet Aircraft Ministry issues a requirement for such a plane. A prototype must be ready in only 35 days. But this plane will be revolutionary for more than the speed of its development. It will be powered by a rocket engine. Russian interest in rockets goes back to 1903, when mathematician Konstantin Tsiolkovsky published the first scientific paper to suggest that liquid-fueled rockets might be the means to get into outer space. But following the Communist Revolution in 1917, all public news of Soviet rocket experiments was censored. Now hidden from the world, the Soviets set up a special organization to conduct research into military rocket propulsion. It was called the RNII, short for the Russian words for Rocket Scientific Research Institute.
This institute was set up in 1933 and reflected in many ways the long and abiding interest Russians had in space travel and in rocketry. And it would draw a number of important figures, not the least of which was Sergei Korolev, who would later head up the Soviet space program.
In the 1930s, Korolev was the RNII's leading engineer, working on gyro-stabilized rockets, air-to-air missiles, and even rocket-powered aircraft. The Nazis had repeated failures with their own rockets. As a result, German military intelligence dismissed reports of Soviet success with rocket flight as pure fantasy.
Unknown to the rest of the world, until after World War II, the Soviet Union was the world leader in rocketry and certainly in aspirations for spaceflight. And Sergei Korolev was one of the leading lights in rocket engines.
Sergei Korolev is an interesting figure. Ukrainian by background, went to the Kiev Polytechnical School, and then came to Moscow in the 1930s, became interested in aviation, tinkered around with gliders and aviation designs, but his real passion was rocketry, and he was very much interested in developing rocket-powered aircraft.
In 1936, Korolev began work on the RP-218, a rocket-powered research aircraft designed to fly to the edge of space. The crew would be encased in a specially sealed and pressurized cockpit, and the plane would be launched from the underside of a bomber. It was an idea that wouldn't hit America for another 20 years. Early versions of the X-15 copy the mission profile planned for Korolev's RP-218, reaching an altitude of nearly 40 miles high. But before Korolev could get his plane off the ground, the curse of Stalin's paranoia strikes again. The designer is arrested on false treason charges. He is sent to the goldfields of Kolyma in the far northwest of Siberia. Known as the land of White Death, Kolyma is the coldest place on Earth. Kolyma is the coldest place on Earth, with temperatures plummeting to nearly 100 degrees below zero.
Korolev was rescued by the intervention of Andrei Tupolev. Tupolev was still back in prison in Moscow, but he saw it as his task to rescue all of the young Soviet aircraft designers who'd been scattered through the Gulag and bring them back to Moscow where they could work under reasonably benign conditions, though still in prison.
Others are not so lucky. Many of the key research workers at the RNII Rocket Research Institute are executed. With their deaths, the visionary RP-218 is abandoned. But then in 1941, with the Nazi invasion, Russia turns back to rocket power. She needs a fast rocket-powered fighter aircraft to combat the marauding Luftwaffe.
The trouble with a rocket is it gets through its fuel very quickly, so you're not going to stay up there very long. But it does open the way to unbeatable performance, which is just what you want if the enemy bombers are coming over at high altitude and you want to go and take off quickly, climb up and shoot some of them down. A lot of Russian designers took this idea on board.
The new plane is called the BI. Its nickname is the Devil's Broomstick. The BI is powered by a rocket motor generating 2,500 pounds of thrust, more powerful than the first generation of jet engines. It is armed with two 20mm cannons on the nose and reaches speeds of nearly 600 miles per hour. It is the fastest aircraft on Earth. Working round the clock, the design team has the first prototype ready by late 1941, only a few months after the Nazi invasion. The BI is being developed at a plant near Moscow, but the advancing German troops are headed toward the Soviet capital. Work on the BI is halted in a desperate bid to move the aircraft and its workforce to the safety of Sverdlovsk, 850 miles east of Moscow. The disruption means the first BI fighter is only ready to fly under rocket power on May 15, 1942. The test pilot is Grigory Bakhchivandzhi, a Soviet fighter ace. The Devil's Broomstick shoots upward at 500 miles per hour. The world's first rocket-propelled combat plane has flown.
The B-1 rocket plane was debuted in 1942. It was a rocket-powered aircraft, plywood construction. It was designed to be an interceptor, to intercept German bombers. And a number of these were built and flown.
Stalin immediately orders the BI into production. Meanwhile, in Germany, work has also begun on a rocket-powered fighter, the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet. But the operational version of the Comet will not fly till 1943, nearly 18 months after the Soviet rocket plane. But the new rocket technology proves difficult to perfect, while the years of delay in which Stalin butchered the cream of Russia's rocket engineers has not helped. One problem is that a rocket motor uses up fuel at a great rate. In a bid to solve this problem, designers mount ramjet engines to the wingtips of the BI. These can be used in ordinary flight, with the rocket motor switched on to climb to altitude, or in the attack mode. Then another problem emerges. On March 27, 1943, Grigory Bakhchivandzhi takes off on a routine test flight. It will be his last.
By 1943, 7 BI-1 prototypes had been built. They had flown extremely well at remarkable speeds, and not least was their ability to climb roughly twice as fast as any other fighter in the world. Unfortunately, later in 1943, their test pilot, Bakhchivandzhi, was making a very fast low-level pass. It went into a dive at something like 500 miles an hour, and it set up a longitudinal oscillation, climbing and diving. The pilot had no chance whatsoever.
The Russians had stumbled into one of the major problems of supersonic or near-supersonic flight. As an aircraft approaches the sound barrier, a wall of heavy air builds up in front of the wing, and that can cause control problems and force the aircraft into a dive.
Unable to solve the problems, work on the BI is stopped. The 50 BI fighters under construction are scrapped. The Devil's Broomstick is consigned to history's dustbin. But Soviet engineers remain fascinated with rocket power. Rocket boosters are fitted to most standard Red Air Force fighters to add speed. And in 1943, Russia's top rocket expert, Sergei Korolev, develops a new liquid-fueled rocket motor. It is tested on a special version of the PE-2 bomber. These breakthroughs in rocket technology enable Alexander Moskalev to resume his quest for a supersonic delta-winged fighter.
Russian designers were given a pretty free hand sometimes.